David Dorsey of the News Press. You can follow Dorse on Twitter at David A. Dorsey. David, thanks for your time. Hope you and the family are doing well these days. How are you?
Yeah, we're hanging in there. I'm glad you're back in action. I've been thinking about you and yours. I'm glad to be back on the show.
Well, as I said, thanks so much for agreeing to come on, and I appreciate the kind words and thoughts. Thanks for reaching out during my rough couple of weeks. Friday night, you were in downtown Fort Myers when some of the peaceful protesting was going on. What is it that you witnessed?
Yeah, so I saw a lot of energy, a lot of young people. When I say young, I'm talking about maybe the 18 to 39 crowd. It seemed like most everyone was in their 20s and maybe in their early 30s, and the myriad of signs. Everyone had it seemed like everyone was carrying a cardboard sign, and most of them were printable. I can't breathe, no justice, no peace, and justice for George Floyd. That kind of variety. A few of them were vulgar, directed at the police and directed at the president. But for the most part, it doesn't seem like presidential politics were part of the issue. It was and everyone I interviewed. I can't interview 700 people, all right, but I interviewed maybe a dozen people, and everyone just wanted to be treated equally by the police as compared to white people and the colored people. We want to be treated equally. That was the theme that I got from that march.
And Dave, when you've been covering sports and events in Southwest Florida for a long time, and we all know that this town's past is not perfect like many others. From a level of how different this seems, how much of a wave this seems, how much do you think is going to come out of it? How important was this weekend in your eyes?
Well, it really opened my eyes because I've been here for 26 years almost, and I've never seen anything like this. I've covered the Martin Luther King Jr. Parade before, and that's an annual event in the Dunbar community. This was just something altogether different, and that Martin Luther King Jr. Parade is just kind of routine, and this just sprang up, and we're a little late to what's been happening across the country. I think that was the 11th day after George Floyd's death, and the rest of the country has been at this for a lot longer than that. That the march went away from downtown opened my eyes. That they went down McGregor Boulevard, they went down 41, and they went into areas that these marches don't typically go into. Marching all the way down to the Edison and Ford home, that sparked some symbolism to me, because that was an area of town that until 1969, black people would get arrested just for being there. So change was in the air. I don't know. I can't predict what kind of change could be on the horizon. I can't say. I don't know how many more of these there will be. I did interview some experts last week for another story that I wrote about I wanted to kind of get a grasp of when these things turn bad. And we haven't had that yet, thankfully, here in Southwest Florida, other than maybe a handful of arrests in Naples. And I hope it stays that way for all of our sakes. Usually these rallies and protests die down 5 to 6 days after the event that triggers them. and that they're still going strong almost 2 weeks later tells me that maybe it's more than just George Floyd's death that's on the minds of people here in Southwest Florida.
He's David Dorsey, as he mentioned, over 25 years with the news press. You can follow Dorsey on Twitter at David, the letter A, Dorsey, Dorsey. We've mentioned it many times this morning, and in the past, you wrote a book, Fourth Down in Dunbar, in which obviously you were talking about the young athlete in a certain section of town, in which the struggles that they had to make it. And I'm wondering, has any event in the last couple weeks made you think about that time when you put the book together, something that either you included in the book or maybe even something you didn't include in the book?
Yeah, it's funny you ask, because the third person I interviewed Friday night was a cousin of Javon Curse and of Philip Buchanan, and he played high school football with Ernest Graham. So I was, and his name is Shannon Fuller, and so it kind of struck me. I'm sure I saw him play high school football a generation ago, and now he is, he was one of the leaders of this rally, and he was speaking on the megaphone at Centennial Park. But it did bring me back to, researching for Fourth Down in Dunbar, the themes that these young men go through, the growing up in the neighborhoods that we call Dunbar, and that, if I had 18 chapters in my book looking at 16 different athletes, and I think of the 16 athletes, only one of them came from a two-parent home. And I think that the 16 athletes, almost all of them had run-ins with law enforcement, whether it be warranted or not, whether it be them or a family member going to prison. Ernest Graham's brother went to prison for a few years, and that's not a big secret. And then Ernest Graham, as we know, went on to play in the NFL for a good 8 seasons with the Buccaneers, and he's now coaching football at Evangelical Christian School. So, yes, the answer to your question is yes. I thought about I've been thinking a lot lately about Fourth Down in Dunbar.
And then you also recently, and through all of this, had a talk with Tommy Watkins and reprinted part of his blog. I guess, for lack of a better way, if you want to enlighten people on that, but I mean, this is another, Southwest Floridian that can speak truthfully of what's happened to him in his own backyard.
Yeah, so, there are big asks like, can we not get our neck kneeled on for 8 minutes and suffocated? But there are those small asks that people in the community want, and that is to be able to go to the CVS at Edison Avenue and 41 and not have guns pointed at you by police. In this case, it was Lee County deputies that Tommy Watkins told me about. Tommy Watkins had told me that story a number of years before. We were just having a conversation, and I thought about doing a story at the time, and then I thought differently about it, and then years later this happened, and he told the story on his own, and we decided to pick it up, and he said, yeah, go ahead and print it. But that's, Tommy told me about another story. He told me that he had a flat tire on the side of the road somewhere in the Dunbar community, and he had a law enforcement officer pull a gun on him while he was trying to change his tire. And this is just the kind of thing that the protesters and Tommy Watkins hope to see changed in the future, to not have that happen anymore.
He's David Dorsey of the News Press. You can follow him on Twitter at David, the letter A, Dorsey, Dorsey. Dorsey, what do you make of all this?
Well, here in Lee County, gosh, I don't know what to make of it, really, because the area is still from what I see, segregated. We had the court order to desegregate schools in 1969. We were one of the last school districts in the United States to integrate. So then Dunbar was, and I described this in the book, Dunbar was kind of carved into a pie, and where you lived in the community determined which high school you would go to. That became a big factor in high school athletics. There was all these old school stories of people manipulating the boundaries so that a certain athlete on one side of the street would suddenly be going to another school. Deion Sanders, the most famous athlete that we've ever had, used his grandma's address so that he could go to Fort Myers High School, and the North Fort Myers High coach Ron Hoover found out and turned him in. So then Deion went to Fort Myers as a freshman, and as we know, he graduated as a Red Knight. So that court order ended, and Dunbar High reopened, and so now all of a sudden we almost have segregated schools again. Dunbar High is, I think, 86% African American enrollment now. That's not 100%, but that's not what the court order had mandated years prior. The funding is equitable now, and that was the reason for the court order, I think. So, but I don't know where we're going in the future with this. As we go back to schools being mostly white and mostly black, I don't know if that's good or bad for Lee County. That's for someone smarter than me to figure out.
Dorsey, finally, you mentioned Deion, and we've never had any success being able to talk to Deion all the years that Mark and I have been together, and even when we worked apart, we've never had any success. You have. All right. I'm just wondering, A, have you been able to get a hold of Deion in the last 2 weeks, number one, and or B, is there anything that Deion has told you in the past that you've thought of here in the last 2 weeks?
Well, Deion, I haven't tried to reach out to Deion. I try to reach out to him every now and then, and I haven't talked to him since I don't think I've talked to him other than maybe waving to him, and since 2011 when he went into the Hall of Fame. Deion just still has a little bit of he kind of carries a grudge still for the fishing incident when he was fishing on, I think it was airport property, and he was arrested for trespassing, and that was when he was still an active player. But he has been getting more involved in Lee County over the past 2 years, especially. And I saw him speak at Fort Myers High. I have a feeling Deion will become even more involved, and this is just a theory and not any based on anything he said or told me. But I think as his children are getting older and they're teenagers and they're going into college, once he sends them off to college, and they're on their way to becoming men, I think that he might figure out a way to be more involved here. And I'd like to talk to Deion. I'd like to see what he has to say. So let's keep our eyes on Deion, because I think when his kids go away to college, that he'll have a lot more time on his hands, and he'll probably find a new purpose for himself.
Well, Dorsey, thanks for agreeing to do this, number one. And number two, for those that didn't check out Fourth Down in Dunbar, this may give you a second opportunity to check it out. It was a very well done book about a bunch of local athletes, Fourth Down in Dunbar, from David Dorsey of the News Press. You can follow him on Twitter at David, the letter A, Dorsey. Dorsey, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, David. Great work in the past few days. I mean, all the time, but great work.
Thanks for having me. I'm still thinking about you and your recovery, and keep at it, man. I like what you do here for the community.
Boy, he sounds like Coach Sam there.
Yeah.
Every time we have Coach Sam on, he thanks us for what we do for the community. And Mark and I look at one another and go, what the hell are we doing for the community?
Don't know. Never quite been able to figure that one out, David. You're welcome.
Thank you, Dorsey, for the kind words. David Dorsey of the News Press, as he's mentioned, over 25 years.
And by the way, the book's really easy to get. Amazon, it's in all the places. By the time you get fourth down in, it's going to pop up.